What's up, everybody? My name is Kalen. I'm a beekeeper. Today, I want to look at a video that I got in my email in response to reading the academia paper on Swan Lake. So, I got a video in my email that said, "You read this paper, there is something similar available, so let me check it out." It is called Analytic Times, Jung, Deleuze, and a Critique of Continuity. So the description of the video reads, it's a conference on Jungian psychology and the human sciences by the International Association for Jungian Studies, the Kessner University, PA, March 2021. So the keywords here are psychoanalysis, Jungian psychology, Gilles Deleuze, Jungian and post-Jungian psychology, Carl G. Jung, Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, time perception, dreams, Carl Gustav Jung, Jungian psychoanalysis, Jungian analytical psychology. So these are the key terms, and the video is created by David Henderson. So let's watch this. I'm just gonna put it on record for you guys, and I will respond at the end of it.
Just by way of brief introduction, David Henderson is currently a lecturer in the Jungian Studies program at the University of Essex in their Department of Psychosocial and Psychoanalytic Studies. He also is a psychotherapist with his own private practice in London, and he's a member of the British Jungian Analytic Association and the International Association for Analytical Psychology. His research interests include psychoanalysis, comparative psychoanalytic theory, Jung and Deleuze, cultural homelessness, and psychoanalysis and religion. Today he'll be presenting on Analytic Times, Jung, Deleuze, and a critique of continuity.
All right, well, thank you. I want to start by just saying where I'm coming from. So I'm a psychotherapist. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not an artist. I'm not a cultural historian. So I'm approaching the whole question that I want to look at from the point of view of a psychotherapist. And I'm doing that by borrowing some concepts from Deleuze. So this is, I think, a time-honored thing for therapists to do, is to take a bit of this and take a bit of that and put it in their consulting room, and hey, presto, you can reach out and take what you want off the shelf. So, I mean, Jung was also a psychotherapist. I think people forget that he was a psychotherapist, and to my mind, he was primarily a psychotherapist. He wasn't a philosopher or a theoretician or whatever. And but he liked to pick up stuff from all over the shop. You know, Kant, Levi-Bruhl, etc., etc. And he's heavily criticized. You know, if he picks something up and doesn't use it properly, then he catches hell. So I'm just saying that just to sort of advertise that I'm not making an intervention into Deleuzean philosophy, and I'm not claiming to have a kind of exhaustive or deep understanding of Deleuze. But there's some ideas that I find quite helpful. So I'm going to do some screen share here. So as a psychotherapist, there are several problems that intrigue me. So one is the gap between the archetype and the archetypal image. which is a sort of problem of theory. And there's a huge amount of energy and effort put into trying to bridge the gap between those things. Another interest is the passivity of the analyst, which is a problem of practice. So I sort of think the passivity of the analyst is the key to the whole thing. That's the kind of secret to analysis. And then the operation of transference, which is a problem of process. So how does transference flow in the analytic process? How does transference transmutes things in the process? So there, having looked at these things, there's various ideas that I thought were sort of imaginative responses to some of this. So there's Neumann's, he's got the notion of the creation myth, which is about the original unity, the hero myth, the separation of the systems, and the transformation myth, which is centroversion and stages of life. And then Kant has, again, a three-part little system there. The synthesis of apprehension, which he relates to sensibility, synthesis of reproduction, which he relates to understanding, and synthesis of recognition related to reason. So I'm not really going to go into Neumann and Kant. What I want to think about here is Deleuze, and Deleuze on time. So Deleuze has a little system of three types of time. He has what he calls the first passive synthesis of time, which he relates to habit and the present. He has the second passive synthesis of time, which he relates to memory and the past. And the third, to what he calls the empty form of time and to eternal recurrence. But what I found interesting in terms of applying something to the clinical practice is to think of the first synthesis of time as related to the collective unconscious and archetypes, and to the present. So the archetypes are a kind of eternal present. The second synthesis of time I relate to the archetypal image, and for me that resonates with collective memory, collective consciousness, cultural complexes, and the past. So an archetypal image already has a history. So it encompasses the past. Then the third synthesis, the human, which points to the future and infinity, and I'm going to call that the historical subject. So I'm making this little thing that has the archetype, the archetypal image, and the historical subject as three kinds of ways of thinking about things that happen in therapy. So I'm relating the archetype to the present, the archetypal image to the past, the historical subject to the future. So according to Williams, there are different times according to the singularities of the individual process at work. We must avoid any general spatial representation of time as something pre-existent that things can be placed on or in. There is no general line of time and no space-time continuum. I find this quite, I'm very interested in Bion, and of course Bion's got the without memory and desire. He also says somewhere that when something new happens, we never know where it came from. I think there's something of that in this idea that when a new state of affairs arrives, we can't necessarily map it from a previous state of affairs. All we can do is sort of attend to it and try to understand it on its own terms. So Deleuze makes a kind of, expands on this. He says in Spinoza's ethics can appear to be a long, continuous movement that goes in an almost straight line with an incomparable power and serenity, passing again and again through definitions, axioms, postulates, propositions, demonstrations, corollaries, and scholia, carrying everything along in a grandiose course. A greater familiarity with the text, however, reveals three elements which are not only contents but forms of expression. Three kinds of knowledge which are also modes of existence and expression. So I'm relating this three kinds of knowledge, three forms of expression to archetypes, archetypal image, and the historical subject, that they each are not just a different form of existence and expression, but they each are a different kind of time. So time, you can't really say in the archetype, but time, if we think of the archetype, is a kind of timeless present.
That is very interesting. When we think of Slick Dissident's work and the way he brought the concept of spirotonality to his Enneagram, because there is musical harmony underpinning everything that he speaks at an ethical basis. So the way he bends these words and archetypes to mean what they mean on the world stage through which his Enneagram finds its expression through Crowley's tarot deck, the Thoth tarot deck, and so on. And he also mentioned that in that tarot deck, the archetypes are drawn with a lot more fluidity to present the passage of time, and instead of putrefaction, it suggests evolution, growth, and incarnation, because everything is evolving within the holism of what things once meant, the words and the cognates migrating and getting different contextual applications. It still adds to what things really meant. That's why Manly P. Hall will say that we can truly take nothing away from the Egyptians' definition of deity. However further we travel to add to it, it doesn't take away from what was fundamental in Egyptian culture and in Egyptian recognition of deity. We just have more words and more realities to ethically align the postulates of deity into why reality manifests and evolves the way it does.
Time in the archetypal image has movement, has fluidity, and has a history. And then the historical subject has a future, which is death, and has a sort of singularity that the others do not have, that the archetype and the archetypal image do not have. And that's part of the challenge of the historical subject, is their singularity. So I want to relate some of these ideas to some work with a client. I've seen quite a few years now, mostly 3 times a week. And early in our meetings, for several years really, she would say, well, nothing's happening. And I had to agree that nothing of significance did seem to be happening. I mean, we would talk about things and there would be events in the person's life and so on. but nothing consequential seemed to be happening in the therapy or in this person's life. And then really suddenly, out of the blue, I would say, she had this dream. The dream is of a giant fish. Half of its enormous body is underwater and half is sticking out of the sea like a boat. There's a person sitting on its tail, tiny in comparison. I'm seeing this from a distance, but I'm at the same time the person riding the fish. There is also an image of my father in a boat. He is standing and holding an oar. Both him and the boat look so small, insignificant, set side by side to the fish. Well, I got very excited with this and somewhat relieved, because in my mind it sort of indicated that the self had been constellated. But the client wasn't that interested in the dream.
That is another interesting point being highlighted, especially when we tap into the water world essences of awareness and the notion that wisdom comes from the sea. Even Credo Mutwa, in his ancestral knowledge, wisdom comes from dolphins and whales.
But I did sort of take comfort that something was moving there. And the fish seemed to, in my listening to it, have an enormous amount of energy. And I had this kind of image of it very slowly sort of moving in the water. This kind of very languid, powerful motion. So then there was another fairly long period where not much was happening. And then again, another dream, sort of out of the blue. This dream, my mother sends me to what used to be my primary school. The school is on a hill. I go on foot, taking the road I used to take as a child. I start walking uphill and the road changes. It is now full of obstacles. Big rocks and fallen trees are blocking my way forward. I manage to get past several obstructions and find myself in a clearing, but staring at a precipice. There is a way around, but it means trespassing. I negotiate my passage with a representative of the Chinese community that owns the land. Continuing my journey, I must pass through people's back gardens, which I know is intrusive. I see a snake, which becomes a creature made of a snake, a hen, and a man. I feed it, the snake part, some dry grass, and I'm allowed to proceed. When I arrive at the school, I report to the receptionist. She is surprised that I came by that road. There is a much easier way to get to the school, she says. Everyone takes the other road. It's easy to get there by car.
The Mercurius dream.
So I showed this person the image of Mercurius from the collective work.
That snake, hen, and man is also very Gnostic Abraxas in its connotation. And maybe Abraxas has a rooster.
She went off and drew it and did a little reading about Mercurius and so on. But the astonishing thing to me was really from that moment, her life really undertook enormous changes, because she had been living in a situation for like over 10 years where she felt completely stuck and didn't know how to get out of it, didn't know how to change it.
Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection's complete? Wouldn't you think I'm the girl who has everything? Look at this trove, treasures untold. How many wonders can one cavern hold? Looking around, you will think, sure, she has everything. I've got gadgets and gizmos of plenty. I've got who's its and what's its galore. You want thingamabobs? I got 20. But who cares? No big deal. I want more. I wanna be where the people are. I wanna see them dancing, walking around on those, what's that word again? Oh, feet. Flipping your fins, you don't get too far. Legs are required for jumping, dancing, strolling around on those, what's that word again? Street. Up where they walk, up where they run, up where they stay all day in the sun, wandering free. Wish I could be part of that world. What would I give if I could live out of these waters? What would I pay to spend a day warm on the sand? I bet you on land they understand, and they don't reprimand their daughters. Bright young women, sick of swimming, ready to stand, ready to know what the people know. Ask them my questions and get some answers. What is a fire according to Carlos Castaneda, and what is it? What's the word burn? When's it my turn? Wouldn't I love to explore that shore up above? Out of the sea. Wish I could be part of that world.
Within a couple months of having this dream, everything had been reorganized in her life. So change had occurred in very practical ways. She moved out of the situation she was in. She got a place she really liked. She made many changes in her life, and I think she was astounded that this was possible to actually do something differently. But she managed to do it. So this, to my mind, we've now entered the space of the archetypal image. So in the space of the archetypal image, these images have a history. We can read about them. There's a lot of energy. They're full of energy and movement. And so she had, this dream, and then this other dream. A big white snake is guarding an entrance to a restaurant that I want to get into. The shape of its head and its pose resembles that of a cobra's. With its body upright, the snake is looking straight at me, facing me. It's very angry, but it isn't poisonous. An image of a tree when snakes are hanging from its branches like fruit. So I have, these kind of dreams and images. What I thought was important for the therapy was that they represented or embodied or released an enormous amount of energy. It seemed to me rather beside the point to get her to think about these in so-called Jungian terms. What was important was that somehow her life was moving and she was moving. And not that she should become a sort of Jungian acolyte. So after this period of archetypal imagery, quite suddenly again, these shifts from one, you could say, mode of time to another, one state of being to another, were quite sudden. So suddenly, really, all these big dreams disappeared. And, she was much more focused on her daily life and what she, sorting out a place to live and things like that. And her dreams reflected this change. So my ex-boyfriend introduces me to his new girlfriend. She seems nice, but I say something cold to her. I then apologize to my ex, saying that I'm leaving as I feel too bitter to stay. Me and some other people must catch a ferry. I have 1 hour to pack before our car is set to leave. We need to leave by noon. Provided that there will be no traffic issues, we will have 5 hours to get to the ferry. I'm stressed out. I don't know if I can be ready in such short time. I'm trying to think and organize myself, but I'm constantly interrupted by people who want something from me and are unaware that I'm leaving. So this thing that I'm trying to think and organize myself, these are sort of ego functions that she's trying to own. And from her childhood, this thing of people interrupting and not realizing that she has her own trajectory is quite pertinent. I need to go. I'm in a hurry. Before leaving, I must find a yellow notebook and give it back to one of my clients. She is looking for it. She must not know that it was me who took it. I'm in charge of an upcoming school event. I'm in a classroom on my own, unable to organize a meeting. We're meeting there to discuss the imminent celebration. People have expressed their interest in the event. Kids have drawn pictures wanting to be part of it. Everything is available for the occasion, and yet I don't know how to make it happen, how to pull it all together. So this really was her dilemma of the moment. I don't know how to make it happen, how to pull it all together. In other words, how to make a life in the world. And then sometime after that, there was this dream. I move into a flat that belongs to my brother. It's only temporary, perhaps to do with the COVID situation. I'm to share it with one other person, I think a woman. What first seemed to be a tiny one-bedroom flat turns out to be much bigger as I begin to look around. Wandering around the place, I'm astonished how spacious it is. It's shabby, the furniture is old, and it needs painting, but it's airy and has a lot of potential. I investigate the kitchen and wonder how it is that the furniture is the same as my parents'. Then I find myself in the bedroom. My flatmate is already asleep. It's summer and I feel hot, so I open a big sash window and step outside onto the window ledge. I sit there for a while and then look to my right. There on the same level, probably on the neighbor's balcony, I see 3 different kinds of birds. They look extraordinary, unlike any bird I've seen before. One of them reminds me of something, perhaps a beige, high-heeled shoe. The most striking of them is much bigger than the other birds. It's extraordinarily beautiful with lots of wonderful deep blue feathers. What a marvelous sight. I think that at some point it looks at me. It has a stern expression. Perhaps all birds do. Looking at the birds, I almost fall off the window ledge. Barely catching myself, I pull myself up and go back inside. So this dream, is a long way from, a dream in the middle of the ocean with an enormous fish. And it has echoes with these thoughts of Deleuze. One steps outside what's been thought before. Once one ventures outside what's familiar and reassuring, once one has to invent new concepts for unknown lands, then method and moral systems break down and thinking becomes a perilous act, a violence whose first victim is oneself. Thinking is always experimenting, and what we experiment with is what's coming into being, what's new, what's taking shape. So I think this particularly refers in my little system here to the historical subject. So Semetsky sort of expands on this. The subject in process, that is, as becoming, is always placed between multiplicities, yet one term does not become the other. The becoming is something between the two. This is something called by Deleuze a pure affect. Therefore, becoming does not mean becoming the other, but becoming other. The non-place in between acts as a gap or differentiator, introducing an element of discontinuity in the otherwise continuous process of becoming and allowing the difference to actively intervene. So what I want to suggest is that for the historical subject, the main task is becoming other. So becoming other than oneself. Really, that the importance about being oneself is becoming other than oneself. And this, for me, has a strong kind of echoes in Jung. The imaginatio, as the alchemists understand it, is in truth a key that opens the door to the secret of the opus. The place or the medium of realization is neither mind nor matter, but that intermediate realm of subtle reality, which can be adequately only expressed by the symbol. The symbol is neither abstract nor concrete, neither rational nor irrational, neither real nor unreal. So I am taking the historical subject to be a symbol. We are all a symbol in the sense that a symbol is the best possible representation of something that could not be represented otherwise. So we are each a symbol, and our task really is to be that symbol and to try to understand what that could possibly mean, to be this particular symbol, to have our own singularity, to be unlike anybody else, and to be so like everybody else at the same time. I often think about how, Jung, when he built his tower, he, at the end of his life, he built the top tower, and he says that's the ego. And so I suppose that's sort of implied in the kind of schema I'm putting here, is that the ego, the historical subject, is the final stage of things. It's not the beginning. So, if we think of the infant is sort of all archetypal. And then as the infant goes into life, there's a kind of archetypal imagery moving it about. And ego is actually, and the identity of the historical subject is something quite late in life. What I like about what Deleuze is saying about time also is that each of these times is a different mode of being. So there's so much emphasis among therapists and analysts and so on in continuity. That how do you get from here to here, or how do you can you make an interpretation that will move the material from here to here, or can you somehow listen in a way that's going to allow certain things to unfold. But what I like about this notion is that each of these, the archetypal image, historical subject, are a thing in themselves, and what's between them is a gap, and we can't really sketch out what's in the gap. We need to allow that gap to be there, and then something can appear. So it's a question of how this goes, I guess, back to the passivity of the analyst. Is there peculiar passivity of the analyst that allows things to appear? Or is it incumbent on the analyst to make things happen, or bridge things and bring them along and so on? So these ideas are sort of, very rough, and part of, I'm trying to write the paper that encompasses some of these things. But I found it quite just liberating to take Deleuze's ideas about time and, in a way, step outside the sort of demand of continuity, that the expectation of continuity. And that as an analyst, as a therapist, continuity is not my responsibility. So, what is my responsibility? It's not necessarily to tie everything together in a seamless process. So that's all a bit rough and ready and in process, but I'd be interested to know what your reaction is.
David, I find it really hard to digest really complicated concepts that you're introducing, but find it really fascinating. So forgive my question here. Could you see a parallel between this discontinuity of time in Deleuze and the concept of dissociation?
Well, in the concept of differentiation. So, because for Jung, I would say differentiation is the engine of individuation. And for Deleuze, he's interested in difference and how difference creates the new. So I think often, if things aren't linked up, then people think of dissociation or fragmentation or whatever. I'm trying to put a more positive spin on that and say, well, each of these is a kind of event, a kind of space and expression in its own right. So it needn't, I'm not sure whether you meant fragmentation or dissociation. In what sense you meant that? You mean in a pathological way?
Not necessarily. I was thinking of just the general dissociative aspect of the psyche. So it could be like just gaps, living in the gap, this lack of representations that happens at times, or a failure of articulating, this unformulated experience, to use Don Stern's phrase.
Well, I think the gaps are really essential, really, to not worry about them too much. Let them be.
I love that. It's giving me a lot of validation in terms of like the process by which I, detach from knowing what I can't know, and knowing that I've like given my Elohim its fertile ground in the black within that to tetramorphically become more than what things seem, because like I just like I can't rationalize the fact that we need to know what's going on in every space hyperdimensionally, and be this like monk in a yoga position just meditating on all of it, like just the whole spiral of life coming to this focal point. To me it's like, where is the galaxies breaking off from that central source? Like it needs to have like a sun unto its own, face upon the waters, bringing a new earth without form and void from there, and beget new creations. That's why, like, even in that Vibrant or Universe podcast episode on Loki, it was talking about like Genesis, genes of Isis, frozen matter, frozen memories, demons, and so on. Eighth sphere, astral beings that, through the Malkuth moon becomes another point of departure for that Neptune crown to trickle in through Da'at, Uranus, and the Sun into the Earth. That's why I feel like creating art and creating these simulacra in alignment to what your psychodynamics and syncretism is, it plots you within a timeline for retracing yourself, but it also gives you a point of departure to create new timelines, new meanings, new simulacra, and new experiences within your matrix. Because it felt like my brain was gonna go to mush trying to keep it all in like one linear ethical meaning of God throughout all time, because it became so discongruent, or disconfoculating is the word I use, from Kenji King, because it's like, how do you get to be an individual if you don't tie the fates together and cut the bards, get the sheaths and shear some of Virgo's hair? You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Just something that came up for me when you were talking about the gaps, I think, was more like the gaps being, to me, seeming more like a continuity of absence and presence, and kind of like a vacillation between the two. And maybe I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like the role of the analyst as being absent at times instead of being present, and how that might relate to what you were saying with Deleuze and like the discontinuity of time.
I suppose for me, this idea of the three syntheses and the archetype, archetypal image, historical subject is that they are different forms of time, different forms of consciousness. So they don't really form a continuity in a way. I mean, I'm setting them out as a kind of continuity here.
Father Abraham had many sons,
And the experience of time,
and it started at his germs he spoke on, and the sand kernel became a sun.
So it's partly about, well,
Father
just
Abraham
being
had
open to
many
what's appearing.
sperms.
This has appeared here. This dream has come, or this feeling has appeared, and to take it in its own right, and listen to its own rhythm and its own intentions, without necessarily
Molecularize.
feeling that
Or
it needs to be
homuncularized.
tied in or woven into some
I don't
bigger
know.
fabric or bigger sense of time. I mean, this idea that there is no such thing as the flow of time that includes everything. There are different kinds of time. I don't know if that's really a response to what you're saying.
Thinking out
I
loud,
think, Steve, you
baby,
put your hand
we found love right
Thanks, David.
where we
It's very
are.
interesting. I think it's probably helped me to get a handle on some of the things that you're getting on with, sort of dealing with Deleuze much more than before. I think, as you're probably aware, I do find it very difficult to get hold of Deleuze. There are two issues, probably not appropriate to deal with both of them. I'll mention them though. The first one is with regards continuum. I think you quoted William saying there isn't a space-time continuum, and you talk about discontinuities. And as you may remember, my degree is in maths, and I have some difficulty with a claim like that, because in maths there are both continuities and discontinuities. And in fact, I actually remember, I can't remember the detail of it, but I do remember some lectures at university in maths where we actually took as a premise that there wasn't a continuum and we could deal with things as discrete events. And we found that it led into all sorts of logical contradictions and difficulties. But also there is the, I don't know whether this relates to the sort of dreams and the sort of experiences you've been having, but also there are some massive gaps as well, because if you look at a simple formula like 1 over x, as you approach zero from either the negative or the positive side, what happens is that one side gets increasingly higher and infinitesimally high number, and the other side goes very, very low, and you get an infinitesimally low number, and so you get this massive gap period.
That's a very interesting observation, especially because I can't do math. Like, I literally, I can't, I can envision it for myself, conceptually, formulaically, abstractly, but making the numbers do physics, fusion and fission, numbers doesn't really generate concepts for me unless I attach meaning to what they represent, and so oneness means something different to everybody. two-ness means something different to everybody, but like the universality of one and two, as you would have it on a finger pointed or a finger reduced, um, it's very synchronous to the fact that uh, we fill in the gaps by ourselves. We create the densities and depravities by ourselves. How we choose to represent it and then re-represent it, that is the bards of fate. That is the three sisters sharing one eye. That is the Jedi hook of the Leviathan, because um like we will always envy the absence we intuit, and we will always reject that which we are full of. So in order to like be this Gemini with the two pillars that kind of like brings in the gateway of 0 and 1 from the negative and positive, that is the birth of tripolarized light and electromagnetism to me.
In this one very, very simple formula that is itself a continuity, but is broken by this massive discontinuity, and actually trying to bring the two sides, together. As you bring them together, they just get further and further apart, and nobody can actually tell us what is happening at the point of the singularity. That's one point. And the other point I just mentioned briefly, because I think the first point relates to your discussion of time. It goes back to this idea of there being a gap.
Why is this thing?
The other point I just mentioned briefly, because I think the first point relates to your discussion of time. It goes back to this idea of there being a gap between archetypes and the archetypal image. Reading
This thing is very soft. Hold on, guys.
fairly traditional interpretation of Kant, that is, there was a correspondence between
the Hermetic law of correspondence.
Roger Scruton, I think,
All opposites are
he says that's a misreading of Kant.
equal and yet different by degree.
An archetypal image as a phenomenon, and an archetype as a noumenon with negative borderline concepts. They're not related. So the gap is not that there's a correspondence and a gap we somehow need to fill. It's just a description of two different domains. And I find that really useful when reading in Jung, because very often he denies that he can say anything at all about the archetype. And it's because, actually that is a different domain. And it's not identifying a correspondence with that archetype. It's typically confusing. White and very confusing. But it's actually two completely different domains, and there is no correlation between the two. Sorry, two separate points. You don't need to respond to both of them.
Well, there's not time to respond properly, but I mean, there is, like people who study fetishes and so on, they say that there is no, you can't read the character of the spirit that's occupying the fetish by how the fetish looks. Right? So the fetish might be beautiful or ugly or violent or peaceful or whatever. That's just the statue, right? But the personality, the character of the spirit that's come and occupied that statue, you can't read it off of the statue. So I think of that sometimes in terms of archetypal image. There's the archetypal imagery and all of that. But you can't really read an archetype off of an archetypal image. It doesn't necessarily tell you much or possibly anything about the nature of the archetype in itself. But I guess also, in response to what you're saying, I'm trying to find a way to think about actual experience of therapy, and so, I mean, what you're saying about mathematics is interesting, but actually in being embedded in the therapy process, what kind of language can I find to sort of express what's going on there? I mean, I think that's a theme that's come up several times in this conference, is like, is there a kind of distinct language or vocabulary of clinical experience that is different from a language that's trying to, embed itself in hard science or mathematics or even philosophy? So I think, somebody like Harold Searles, is, his whole theory is clinical. It's a clinical theory. He's not really going outside of that to find many ideas to talk about it.
I suppose that's the difficulty that, perhaps it causes me, is that coming from it from a mathematical or a scientific perspective, it's trying to find, for you, you're trying, and other clinicians, you're trying to find ways of using metaphors that help to explain what's happening with clients. But, as happened in the Pauli-Jung correspondence, I think I may have mentioned this too before, that at one point Jung uses a scientific analogy, and Pauli says, hold on a sec, you can't do that because it would cause scientists all sorts of problems. And I think that's the thing I keep tripping up with, is that some of the terms that I can't help but make that connection with science, and I keep falling over that.
I'm sorry, we have gone over the time. Do you want to make one more brief comment, David?
I'd like to hear Roger's question. Okay. No, thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
That was a very, very, very enriching conversation. Comment down below. Below. Comment down below what you guys think. I find this very therapeutic. I find it very validating, and I find it very. My heart will go on.